maybe what didn't happen for him in his career so far will happen with us.
Well,
And it didn't
and
happen with him anywhere, really.
he got put in that right wing spot with those two players, and he just really couldn't do anything with them. And I think they lost confidence in him, and you could see it when they were playing together.
Yeah.
DeBrusk excelled in that spot, so give him all the credit in the world. Welcome to another edition of the Pucks with Haggs podcast. As always, I am your host, Joe Haggerty. I think this is the 41st episode, I want to say, of the Pucks with Haggs podcast. I always got to check and go back and figure it out, but we're somewhere in there, 41, 42. Either way, we're happy that you're listening with us today. We got my buddy and longtime colleague, Mick Colageo, with me today to talk about some current events with the Bruins, and actually, this is going to be a mailbag episode where we're answering a lot of questions. So, Mick, please tell everybody where they can find your work.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Thanks, Joe. Rinkwrapmc.com. MC, M as in Mick, C as in Colageo. Rinkwrapmc.com. And I link to it on X, Twitter. And I've also now in Boston Hockey Now, helping out our friend Murph.
Congrats on the new gig, by the way.
And yeah, Hockey News as well.
Good. And let's give us some love to our sponsors, FanDuel Sportsbook. Right now, with the NFL in full swing, I actually lost a fantasy football game last weekend because Russell Wilson knelt down 3 times before they kicked the game-winning field goal. So the lost rushing yardage that I lost on 3 kneel downs for Russell Wilson lost my fantasy football game. But the point is, not to throw Russell Wilson under the bus or vent my frustration about I lost to my dad, who has been gloating about it ever since after the Monday night extravaganza. So, but the point is that the NFL is still in full swing. All the betting, all the fantasy leagues, all the crazy stuff is going on. So go to FanDuel Sportsbook and get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Go to fanduel.com/Boston to kick things off there. And let's also thank our other sponsor, Factor Meals, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit. Delicious, flavor-packed options on the menu. 550 calories per serving. Ready in 2 minutes. They've got protein plus meals with 30 grams of protein. The stuff is really healthy and it's really delicious. So head to factormeals.com/Haggs50 and use the code Haggs50 to get 50% off of your first box. And with that, let's get into the mailbag. We're going to go straight into this. We're not going to talk any current events, anything that's going on right now, Mick. We're just going to answer questions that people have had in front of us. And we've got some good ones because I actually...
Go Mr. Haggs.
That's right. We actually had... I had my first on my Substack account. joehaggerty.substack.com. They have a feature where you can do chats with your subscribers, your followers, whatever. So I actually did one during the game last night, and we had maybe like 10 people in there just like firing questions, having a conversation while the game was going on. It was pretty fun, and most of the questions actually came from that chat. So I will start with one of those right now. Haggs, and this I gotta admit, this is before last night's game. Haggs, Lindholm hurt, doesn't look like the same player as he did during the regular season last year. It looks like the version we saw against Florida, and that is from Michael Tenney, Pucks with Haggs Substack subscriber. Thank you, Michael, for the question. I appreciate it. And like I don't think he looks hurt. And certainly he looked better again last night. He started to look a little bit better. He had a goal last night, his first goal of the season. He played 22 minutes, was second to Charlie McAvoy on ice time. And I really think we talked about this with Jim Montgomery the other day, and I thought his explanation, his answer, his reasoning behind some of what we're seeing with the defensemen, I thought was right on. And it's that the Bruins don't have the puck as much as they did last year in the offensive zone. I don't think they have as much puck possession and as much control and sort of dominant possession in the offensive zone. And B, I think the defensemen are at times probably a little quicker to bail now because there's a lot of the puck goes in and it goes right out again, going the other way, rather than, getting into the offensive zone, getting set, taking risks, feeling like they can do that. I think the defensemen feel a little less of that confidence in being able to do that this year. partially because the centermen that they had are gone that were leading that puck possession and keeping the puck in the offensive zone quite a bit, and also being that third defender as a center, that 200-foot defender that you need as a center to help out your defenseman. Maybe there's a little less trust going on right now where they're, rolling up their sleeves and really taking risks in the offensive zone. So I think that's definitely part of it. And I also do think that Lindholm did not get off to the greatest start. Maybe his confidence got hurt a little bit in the playoffs last year because that was certainly a humbling stretch, even though he was hurt against Florida. Mick, your thoughts on Hampus Lindholm? Have you seen glimmers of him playing, the guy you saw last year? Why do you think that is? And your hope that he's going to revert back to a guy last year that got Norris Trophy votes from people?
And he started out last year without McAvoy.
Yep.
He started playing really well since McAvoy went out of the lineup.
Yep.
And if we were a toxic duo here, we could try to read into that, but we won't because it's silly. And the one thing that I'll say is that I do think Lindholm's been playing better lately, more aggressive. I feel like he's been jumping in as the fourth man on the attack more recently. I feel like that's a strength of his game. I do feel like overall the Bruins do not move the puck out of their own end with the same confidence as they did last season at this time. I do think that some of that's a function of pro scouting, video, and teams knowing what those tendencies and systems were that they were learning about the Bruins at this time last year. They are being rushed, and they have a hard time getting the puck back because teams went to school on what Paul Maurice had the Florida Panthers do to them in the playoff series last year, where they rimmed the puck hard around the zone and get the Bruins out of their cluster in order to get them out to the perimeter to try to break up the network in which they like to play. So it's a tough decision for the Bruins. And Kevin Shattenkirk mentioned this to me in a little one-on-one we had preseason that he noticed, just that he said it's hard for us to get to our system when opponents get into a lot of rimming of the puck. And so we're seeing more teams do it this year. I knew for sure that teams would go to school on what Florida did last year. I didn't really know how they would go to school on it, but that's the primary way they've done. So I just think it's harder for the Bruins to get the puck back. And once they do get it back, teams are trying to find ways to disrupt them, and they're better at it. And I think that's good because it forces the Bruins to be better at what their style will ultimately be in order to counteract that and have a competitive response to that, something we didn't see in the playoffs last year. So I think that even though you're missing two legendary centermen, I had this long time theory. You cannot win the Stanley Cup without a defenseman who can improvise the transition.
Yeah.
This is something that the team needs to have. Well, then who was that player on the Bruins in 2011? Well, it was actually Patrice Bergeron and David Krejci for 2/3 of every hockey game. That was their puck-moving defenseman. Those guys went all the way back, and their stats suffered because of it. They were barely point-a-game players, and the reason they were is because they went all the way back and participated 100% in the breakout and played the 200-foot game even with the puck.
Yep, they did. But they're also both excellent puck possession players, like they always were. And that's something, that's an area where it's not going to show up as much in the statistics necessarily. Guys are still getting goals. Zacha, I think, has played pretty well. Some of the guys have played pretty well in replacing them just from an individual statistical standpoint. But I think the places where you're going to miss them is just the sheer puck possession that you had, advantages against other teams night in, night out, pretty much every single game. It's just not there as much. And we saw this in the preseason too. Like, this is not a surprise. They were getting outshot in all the preseason games. You could see the puck possession was, not as tilted in their favor, certainly, as it used to be. And oft times would be tilted in the other favor. And I just think the presence of the presence being gone affects the defenseman psychologically. Yes, teams are rimming pucks and they're doing different strategies and their scouting reports and all that. But at the end of the day, if you've got good enough players, it doesn't matter what strategy they're employing. You're going to be able to combat it and hold on to the puck and keep it in the zone and enforce your will on another team in the offensive zone. It becomes more effective when you don't have the same personnel that you used to have.
I got to say too, right now too, that Brad Marchand this year has been tremendous.
Yeah.
Not only is he moving like the Brad Marchand prior to the deterioration in his body that necessitated the double labrum surgery that he spent most of last season recovering from, he is also making very strong decisions with the puck in his own end. He used to take all kinds of risk at this time of year and turn it over and cause great A's the other way, right and left. And in the meantime, taking all of his sinister notes so he can torch these guys later when it matters. Now, this year, he's not doing that. He's really taking care of the puck and making great plays. And that's helped them a great, great deal because he's raised his game in that end of the rink in order to get the Bruins safely out of the zone on many an occasion when they used to rely on Bergeron to do that for them.
Yeah, and he still has that, at times in the offensive zone, he's got that determination, like he's feeling it and he's going to try to skate through three guys and get to the net. And sometimes he does, sometimes he doesn't. He's not making bad turnovers when he does, decide to do that. But you can see that ability back again where it wasn't explosively there as much last year, where he could make the quick, turns and the edge work to get through everybody. And get through multiple defenders and take it all the way to the net and still get a strong shot off. You're seeing that that's definitely back, and that danger and that ability to do that for him is definitely there. So no question.
Better too. Pasta's better that way too.
Yep.
Pasta's turning over the puck less, making better decisions, and not putting his team in danger with nearly the frequency that he used to. They're both those guys have really played well.
Yep, I agree. With Pasta, I think some of that is just going to happen by virtue of his game, though. We're going to see times where he's going to make bad decisions or he's going to have turnovers in bad spots, and it'll come and go. And I do think, as sloppy as they were against Montreal the other night, he had 20 shot attempts in that game. He had 11 shots blocked. Just that dash in the score sheet alone was 11. It was, the amount of pucks he was able to get off, the amount of action that he was in, and he was in the middle of everything. Like some of the time I thought he was settling for shots when he could have, made a second move or done something to get around them. And I think that was part of the problem. And maybe that was part of the mental fatigue that Jim Montgomery was talking about, is if you're not, quite as tired and your decision-making's not as clouded, that you've got these defenders blocking your shots and you can make a fake, go around them and either set up a teammate or get a better shot for yourself rather than settle for whatever you were getting right in that moment. And I think things like that is definitely what he was referencing when he talked
become
about
the most fluid player in the league and the world at showing pass and shooting the puck.
Yep.
He's just, it's hard to know where that increment is that one changes into the other. He's really getting great at it.
Yep. All right, let's get on to the next question. The sky isn't falling. This is an interesting shift from Monty. I wonder how this is being perceived in the room. Not saying there are cracks in the room and leadership issues, but in the last few days, Monty has called out his captain for a dumb, unsportsmanlike penalty against the Habs, and now stopped a sloppy practice drill to bagscape the team. Not saying Marshy is the issue, but you got to wonder if this would have happened with Bergie. Something tells me we are about to see a more feisty rat like Brad Marchand and turning up the dial a bit. He's going to need everyone pulling on the rope too. I think that putting the Marchand stuff aside, because I do think, look, somebody at certain points during the season, there are going to be players, especially if you're one of the most penalized teams in the league, somebody's going to have to step up and say, hey, what's going on? And voice some kind of problem, whether it's the coach, whether it's the player. There's going to be times where I think that's going to be required, and to be honest with you, after Marchand got the unsportsmanlike and complained, they got a few calls after that. They ended up getting 2 minor penalties called on the same shift against Montreal, and ended up getting like a 2-man advantage for most of a power play that they had after that happened. So you could make the argument that it actually worked what he did, and it was effective. But bottom line with all of this
That
is,
game annoyed me because the officials called a different game in the third period than they did through.
Of course.
And
Of
then-
course. And there was
then
several
start
penalty
giving back
calls.
after the damage is done.
There
And now
was-
you're overly managing the game. And it's
No,
like, keep
and there
your
was-
calls, let us leave with dignity. That was annoying.
There was several penalties called in that game that were ridiculous anyway. Like they were well within their bounds to be complaining about some of the penalties that were called in that game that were either phantom penalties or just bad calls. But the bottom line with all of this is the reason I wanted to answer this question is that the shift is real for Jim Montgomery. There is no question about it. And I made the comparison. I almost said he was kind of like a hockey coach version of Mr. Rogers last year, where everything was positive, everything was good. Never a discouraging word really was said about anybody and anything. And I think it was very much kept to the positive tip. And I think that's what Patrice Bergeron wanted. And I think that was the discussion between captain and coach before the season started, is that's what the team needed. That's what they wanted. That's not what they got with Bruce Cassidy. And they wanted a softer, more positive, glass half full kind of attitude. And I think Montgomery brought that last year. But I think with the changing of the captain, with what happened in the first round of the playoffs against Florida, with Monty now more comfortable after having a year under his belt and sort of reading the room, reading what he has, he's definitely had a firmer approach and tone this year. There is no question about it. Much more traditional hockey coach tone, whether it was calling out the team when they got to the West Coast in California, saying, what they were bringing to practice wasn't good enough and they were going to get embarrassed against a team like the Sharks if they didn't, tighten things up. Whether it's, talking about in making himself accountable for, the bench penalty that they got a few games ago, complaining to the refs about what they didn't like some of the calls that they were seeing out there, to the bag skate and him being very critical after the Montreal loss and how kind of sloppy the team was and all of the different areas where they weren't good enough against the Canadians. And then, the next time they practice on Monday, we were there. They're in the middle of a drill. I think they were in the middle of a small area 3-on-3 drill that they've done quite often. It's a drill I really like, where they have to make a pass in the D zone 3-on-3 before they can clear it to the new threesome that's waiting down the other end of the ice. You pass it to them, then they go on offense. You're out, and the team that was on offense goes on defense. And they've done that drill a few times, and I really like it. And he does it to encourage like quick passes and quick transitions to get out of the defensive zone, to get it up ice and to get it going offensively. But clearly he didn't like what he saw. It was probably less than a minute or two into the drill when all the pucks went away. They lined up and they started doing this crisscross conditioning drill that was clearly bag skate-esque. It was only about 10 minutes. It wasn't very long. But I think the point was made that, what they were bringing in practice wasn't good enough. And if they wanted to skate and not have pucks, they were going to skate instead. If they didn't bring their very best to the drills and they weren't crisp in exactly the way Montgomery expected them to be. And Mick, I can't tell you the last time I saw any kind of a bag skate like that during the regular season practice. Like you see
23 years ago.
Yeah, you see some conditioning stuff during training camp, no doubt about it. Like the couple times they do those skates where the guys are like dragging ass at the end of it when they're racing up and down I remember that guy Greenway, the huge Greenway, the younger brother of the guy that plays in Minnesota, was trying to hook on as a defenseman with the Bruins a few years ago, changing positions. And I remember him just absolutely dragging ass behind everybody else at the end of the conditioning and training camp. He was having a rough time, but that stuff is very challenging for them. But you do not see that during the regular season. They stay away from that stuff almost always. And that's not something Bruce Cassidy really ever did with the Bruins. That's not something I remember Claude Julien really doing with the Bruins in practice. Certainly I don't remember seeing that under the captaincies of Patrice Bergeron and Zdeno Chara really. So it was interesting to see that yesterday. And, on the one hand, I like that he's doing this, and I certainly think it's what you have to do at the NHL level. You can't be like super positive, like everything's great, everything is awesome all the time approach. And I think we saw that didn't work when it came to, nut crunching time in the playoffs.
And it may not even be punitive. It may be a thing where, listen, we're not getting done here what I want to see, and I need to heighten their awareness as to the tempo that I'm looking for here and what's going to get us from point A to point B.
But it is punitive getting that message across. You're doing it because you're doing a drill they don't like. So that's punitive. You know what I mean? Like the message you're sending is by having them skate with no pucks because they don't like doing that. And it's, it's exhausting to them. So it is punitive. Yeah. It's just not, but it's getting the message across. Like Monty tried to tell us after the practice it had something to do with the sports science people telling him that, whatever. And I don't agree with that. I think that was him trying to cover for his players and not have it go out there as being a bag skate. It was a bag skate. The players knew it. The players talked about it afterwards. Clearly there was a message sent across. But like the point I want to make is, like, I like that he's doing this, and I think you have to do this at times. And I really, it's like the ultimate hockey coach thing to do that when you're 11-1-2, and to be demanding when things are going well, and you could be Ryan Hyde and the Hog and thinking that you're, the NHL's best team and all this other stuff is going on. And I wonder if they struggle a little bit, if he's going to bring out the positivity a little bit more. And it's going to be one of those things where he cracks the whip when things are going really well, and then he edges off of it when, the real hard times hit or the dog days hit.
But as a parent of young children, you're probably, thinking a little subconsciously about that too.
Well, yeah, but I think most hockey coaches,
you don't want them to be Wile E. Coyote and be 100 feet off the edge of the cliff and still and haven't realized where they are yet.
But I think I agree.
But a record can do a lot of lying when your goaltending is this good.
Yes, and I think good hockey coaches do that. I think good hockey coaches will pick their spots to do either one of those things, and I think he's showing this year, like. I honestly think Jim Montgomery's doing a better job this year than he did last year when he won the Jack Adams already. Like, I'm already seeing him making much more impactful decisions, doing things, pushing the buttons at the right times, and really showing a great feel for when he has to do these things. But, my question being, though, like, it's going to be interesting, if we see this happen, this kind of something like this happen a few times, if it gets the same response or doesn't. I just wonder how many times you could do something like this. And maybe this will only be a one-time thing, because I know they had 3 days off before they play Montreal, 4 days off. So they knew they were going to be able to.
It's a real light week. Yeah.
Yeah. So it gave them an opportunity to do something like that in a practice that's not going to come when they're playing 3 and 4.
Mm-hmm.
But I just wonder how long-term, how the team is going to respond if there's more of an edge to the way Jim Montgomery coaches, like we've seen early in the season here.
I don't know, man. Not everybody will respond the same way too. And
Yep.
That may influence what happens at the trade deadline. Sometimes players respond well to the coach, and it may be a situation where he's not going to go be as likely to coddle somebody this year as last year. Since, I think that the Bruins kind of feel like, listen, we believe in our goaltending, we believe in our defense, and our offense is going to have to overachieve. Not my word, not theirs. But I do think that that's the mentality right now. And the pillars of that offense right now, those guys are playing really well.
Yep.
And for the most part, the honest effort is there. There's been guys that I didn't expect much from that have been pretty solid, and guys that I hoped would be solid and have been. Other guys that I expected more from this year that haven't really played well. And and how they respond going forward, it may affect. I'm most interested in how those players respond to the coach as we go forward if their seasons are not going well. Jake DeBrusk.
I was just going to say, I feel like you're referencing a certain player, Mick, and his name is Jake DeBrusk.
Not alone, but he's definitely,
yes.
Hard to ignore it right now.
It is. And, I do think Monty has continued to put him out there a lot and continued to, roll him out there and not really curtail his minutes, certainly not scratch him or bench him for long stretches. And it hasn't gotten to that point, and there may be some hesitancy to do so, just given, his history with Bruce Cassidy and what happened before he got there.
Score early this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action, NFL. The app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including you got spreads, you get your player props, you got over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/Boston and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL.
But this leads into the next question from Mary O'Connell, who was on the Pucks with Haggs Substack chat last night, and just basically asked, what is wrong with DeBrusk, with 3 question marks at the end of it. And I think Mick, you please take this one, because 1 goal in 14 games is 1 goal in 14 games. As talented as he is, this is not the start that he would have wanted in a contract year for sure. But here we are, over a month into the season.
If I see a guy who last year, before he got injured, winning the Winter Classic for the Bruins at Fenway Park, going to the net, taking the hacks and the whacks, putting his body in harm's way, I've seen a lot less of that this year. This looks to me like Jake DeBrusk before he gets put up in the 9th floor next to Eric Holla by Bruce Cassidy. This I feel like we're getting the Jake DeBrusk who wants to swoop in and surprise the game and quickly come upon it without warning and be in and out of it before anybody knew he was there, and the puck's in the net. Sure, it's a great way to play a hockey game if you can get away with it. But it's not everybody's Bobby Ryan, and Bobby Ryan wasn't very good for much of his career either. And Jake DeBrusk, at his worst, is that kind of player, although just not as good as Bobby Ryan was at it. In this case, Jake DeBrusk has really come a long way, and he's become a very solid two-way player who can play through the game, which for him comes with a price. He gets the heck beat out of him. Similarly up front, the way Matt Grzelcyk gets beat up in the back end. And he has to, but in DeBrusk's case, you choose those pathways more than you do as a defenseman. And in his case, we haven't really seen that full all-out version of Jake DeBrusk that we saw in the first half of last season before he got injured. I have yet to see it. I've seen it maybe like a quick bit here, a quick bit there. Maybe there's something there. Maybe he's at the net. Maybe he's trying to make something happen. And Monty's protecting him right now. The last quote I heard was, "There's nothing wrong with Jake's game. The puck's going to go in. I have no complaints." Yep. Maybe he's coming along more than I realized, because I didn't like what I was seeing in camp or at the beginning of the season. He just didn't feel present to me. If the puck doesn't go in, that's not going to decide how I feel about Jake DeBrusk. It's going to be whether or not he's present. And I feel like they cannot afford passengers. And it's a more or less thing. It's not either or. And I do feel like, well, this is a better version of him than we had before the trade request. It's a more matured version of him, but it's not the version we saw a year ago at this time.
It is not, but I would also say that I think you can't discount who he's playing with either in the situation that he's in this year. And I think a big part of it is he was playing right wing with Brad Marchand and Patrice Bergeron last year. That is a plum seat among the forward line. to be playing with those kind of players. And I think he saw more room with the puck because of the two players he was playing with. And he got more opportunities because of the two players that he was playing with. And he, had less defensive scrutiny on him because of the two players that he was playing with. And I think you can't really discount that. And that's why I was very curious to see how he was going to do this year, because I did feel like the season that he had and the numbers that he was putting up, he would have had 30 goals if he didn't get hurt in the Winter Classic. And like, all the more power to him, because we've also seen other players that have not excelled in that spot. Who comes to mind is was Brett Conley, was that his name? The guy they traded for from Tampa Bay, who was a first round pick.
Yeah.
Remember that?
He was a guy that, they were thinking like, okay, maybe what didn't happen for him in his career so far will happen with us.
Well,
and it didn't happen with
he
him anywhere, really.
He got put in that right wing spot with those two players, and he just really couldn't do anything with them. And I think they lost confidence in him, and you could see it when they were playing together.
Yeah.
DeBrusk excelled in that spot, so give him all the credit in the world for that. But it was a different assignment this year. He wasn't playing with them anymore. And maybe he was going to play on the strong side, maybe he wasn't, but he certainly wasn't going to be playing in the same, spot with the same advantages that he had last year. And he's in a position right now playing with Matt Patra and Danton Heinen or whoever in sort of a more of a third line kind of thing, where he's going to have to drive the line more. He's going to have to be the one that is the impact player really on that line, and the guy that is getting shots on net, getting scoring chances, scoring goals. And, he hasn't been able to do that. And I think, it's interesting because I think it gives you more of a read on the player, on his value, on whether you should be willing to go like 6 million, 6.5 million, whatever, on a long-term contract, whatever he's probably going to end up getting on the free agent market. And it gives you insight as to whether he's worth that kind of money or not. And, I think, and the other part of this with Jake DeBrusk is I feel like he's a guy that thinks a lot about everything. I think he's very self-aware. I think he's very willing to take accountability and responsibility for things. I think he knows exactly how many goals he has, and he knows exactly how many games he's played, and he knows what the expectation is. And I think he knows the situation he's in where it's a contract year. And I think all of that stuff, he's not the kind of player that I think is going to excel, is going to be able to compartmentalize, and is just going to be able to put up huge numbers and just rake in the cash. Like I felt like going into this year, if he wasn't signed, he was the kind of player that was going to feel the pressure a bit. And if he didn't get off to a fast start, it was going to like snowball on him a little bit. And I think we were starting to see that a little. I hope he turns it around because I really like Jake. He's a good kid, and the talent is certainly there. But I think, there's a lot of things going on right now, and none of them are particularly good for him in terms of the factors around him.
Yeah, there's two ways that guys respond to offensive struggles. One way is you overthink the game, and you get kind of wrapped up in it, and talking to people like us about that does not help.
No.
And so I totally understand why players don't like discussing this stuff. Two, option B is, what can you do for the team while the puck's not going in the net?
Right.
Hit somebody. Do some things that you are capable of doing. It doesn't mean you're Rick Tocchet. It just means that you can be the most useful version of yourself and compete. And to me, that's really what I'd like to see. Not just because he has to prove his mettle. It's really more that in order for him to get himself in a better frame of mind and get himself to a place where the pucks are going to wind up hitting his knees and going in, it's going to be through finding ways to compete in the game. And hopefully he continues to imagine scenarios on the ice while he's in the middle of the game where, I'm not going to be able to go through three guys here. Fine. You make a smart play and then do what you can do and compete. Keep finding ways to compete. Be a free thinker out there, and within the confines of Monty's system and strategy, and go go get the puck that got chipped in, or win an icing. Just find ways that there's always pathways for your compete level to find its maximum output. Even if you're not getting the outcomes you want statistically.
Yeah, and I think it's about making an impact when the puck's not going in the net. Bottom
Right.
line, like doing something to help the team win when you're going through a stretch where the puck isn't going in. And I think this has always been a criticism of Jake throughout the years, is that when he goes through the stretches like he does, where he's streaky and when the puck's not going in, he tends to not do enough to make himself known out on the ice or to really make an impact. And, now he kills penalties and he does some other things. So there are some areas where he contributes more than he did in the past, but still, like the flybys aren't good enough. Like
no, you can't be doing that.
No,
you gotta really go to the nth degree and really push. And you might not get your result right away. It might not happen for a month. Who knows? But the coach is never going to complain about a guy who's finding out, the place where you can compete, that you go at it all the way. That's going to help the Bruins. It's going to help him. And I'd like to see his mind just kind of relax a little more and just kind of, go gangbusters and not worry about whether the puck goes in off of his stick, and just go be a good hockey player.
We do have Factor Meals to help us out. America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit when it does get busy, when it does get crazy, when we do need a quick meal. They fuel you up fast with flavorful and nutritious ready-to-eat meals delivered straight to your door. Takes less than 2 minutes to cook them. They're fresh, never frozen, meals ready in 2 minutes, like I said. They have calorie-conscious options, going upscale with some of the things they're offering now, like surf and surf meal options, roasted garlic filet mignon, and shrimp and Cajun spiced shrimp and salmon, which is like right in my wheelhouse. This is the kind of stuff I'm all about. So it's got everything for everybody. There's 34 plus chef prepared, dietitian approved weekly options for meals. You can get snacks, you can get breakfast items. Like it's a great deal. So if you want to get Factor Meals, go to factormeals.com/Haggs50 and use the code Haggs50 to get 50% off of your first box. It's a great deal. I've tried it. It's fantastic. I recommend it to you. We love these ready to make meal kits, especially when we're on the go with our kids. So one more time, that's factormeals.com/Haggs50 to get 50% off your first box. You won't be sorry if you go to Factor Meals. It gets the Haggs thumbs up seal of approval.
Jay Golds 2004 asks on Twitter, when the hell is Lucic coming back? Jim Montgomery told us earlier this week it's sort of a bit of a setback. I believe he tried to skate. I don't think it went well. He's about a week behind where he was going to be. So it's probably a week or two before we're going to see him at the very least. After taking the Derek Forbort shot off his ankle, clearly it was a painful thing. But I think a game like last night where it got a little nasty is definitely a game where you missed him a little bit. There was a point in that game where Brad Marchand got hit with a reverse hit from Rasmus Dahlin, and it was a great reverse hit, completely legal, good hard play, knocked Marchand off his skates, and that turned into a scuffle. And during that scuffle, Dylan Cozens grabs Pastrnak from behind and throws him down to the ice while the brave and courageous
Pasta went in there. Pasta went in there to respond, and Cozens, okay, you're going in, I'm going in.
But Dylan Cozens has got a friggin' bubble on because Garnett Hathaway worked him like a few games ago,
I
and
saw
absolutely,
that too.
it worked him over because he didn't check the score sheet and realize who he was going up against,
right?
And he got a bunch of knuckle sandwiches to the face, so now he's got a bubble on his face. But like that, that's the kind of situation where I fully expected Frederick was going to go after Cozens for doing something like that to Pastrnak. And granted, he's not going to fight. He's got a bubble on, but still, like, somebody do something to him to send a message. Like, you're not going to do that to our leading scorer and one of our best
I think
players.
it'll happen down the season's long enough.
It
That'll
should
be discussed.
Yeah, but the point being, it's probably going to happen because Lucic is going to be back, and he was watching the game and he saw what happened, and he's going to be the one to send a message. And when Lucic isn't there, it would be nice if Frederick stepped up and did that sometimes. And you were hoping that Lucic being around this year might be a positive impact on Frederick to be that kind of guy a little bit more often.
Well, I don't know. Maybe he wanted to and was called off. Maybe he wanted to and was told no. I mean, we do have seen footage of him on social ice level camera when Engelland wants to go with somebody off a face-off, and you can hear Frederick yelling at him. You want to go? I go. You want to go? You go with me. I go. They line up. They fight. Frederick wins. Decision.
Yep.
Not a knockout. And
Yep.
And goes off the ice. Woo! It's pretty impressive that Frederick stepped up in, seeing that Engelland was mouthing off at somebody in the Bruins, like he was trying to get something going. And Frederick stepped in and said, I'm the guy right here.
Yep.
And
I like to see that.
A wild guess that Frederick either didn't have opportunity or was told stand down.
Yeah, I guess I hate that if it stand down. They're winning 3-0. They're beating the bejesus out of Buffalo. There's no reason to stand down there. Buffalo wasn't going to win that game last night. They looked like they didn't want to be there. And this actually leads into the next question.
What's wrong with the Sabres?
Extend Bill on Twitter. I'm here to admit that I am one of the idiots that thought Buffalo was going to take the leap this year and be a playoff team. And I thought Buffalo was going to threaten for a playoff spot in the Atlantic Division 2 this year. And maybe they still will. They certainly have the talent. But I'm here to tell you that the team that I watched last night, that Sabres team, was not in it from the first drop of the puck and looked like the same old Sabres. I mean, Owen Power just got absolutely schooled last night. He and Connor Clifton must have been the most miserable guy on the ice, like watching the Bruins bus leave after the game was over last night. Like, take me with you, please.
Cliffy was -3.
He was a -3. He was with Owen Power, and Owen Power was a disaster. It was really, Cliffy was a -3, but Owen Power was the reason he was a -3, because Owen Power was awful. He got beaten to inside ice by Danton Heinen on the first goal of the game. He had that horrible turnover, like it gift wrapped it to Oscar Steen for the goal that he scored, just threw it to him right out of the corner in the front of the net. Would just absolutely struggle bus in his own zone all night long for Owen Power. So, I do wonder.
That's the thing when you're playing young players on defense. It's not linear. You can have a pretty good encouraging. So Mason Lowry looks great right now, right? And near the end of the season, people might be saying, "Whatever happened to Mason Lowry? I thought he was good." That's development, and that's why they got to be cautious in a case like whether they say, "Okay, we're going forward with Lowry, and we're going to be great, and our top four is going to be awesome because he's never going to look back." He'll look back a couple of times. And I still think Power is going to be a good player for Buffalo, but
of course,
these are the hiccups of developing on the job.
Yep. And it's a tough position to be in. Like defenseman, you're going to get exposed sometimes when you're not ready to be in certain situations and you're thrust into it. And, then you also have the quick memory that you have to have when you do make mistakes. And I think that's hard to have when you're a younger player, like Owen Power is. And like Lowry, I agree. He's going to have ups and downs, just like Patra. Like all those young players have the peaks and valleys in their year. There's no doubt about it. And here's a question about the back end again for the Bruins. Please tell me what Shattenkirk brings to the table from at 3GuyBoys on Twitter. Mick, what does Shattenkirk bring to the table?
Reliable puck movement out of his own zone. He can quarterback a power play. He's not a reliable defender in difficult matchups. I would not match him up. If you have injuries and Shattenkirk is in a top four matchup situation against,
it better be very temporary.
Forwards, then speed is going to be a problem.
Yeah.
and physicality is going to be a problem.
Yep.
So his value to the Bruins is when they have the puck. He's pretty smart without it. He actually is a very, very shrewd, very, very studious player. He stuck around despite a lack of size and a lack of speed for a good reason. He's a smart and skilled player who plays to his strengths. And the fortunate thing for the Bruins is that he seems to read the room well and understand what he can get away with and what he can't. So I can understand the theory. They know they needed with less run support for Ullmark and Swayman that they were going to have a better power play this year, a more consistent one. And that's clearly one of the reasons why you got a guy like Shattenkirk instead of a guy like Clifton playing as your third right shot behind McAvoy and Carlo. So that's really what that's all about. Ian Mitchell is basically a younger version of the same kind of player with offensive upside, with defensive liability. But they figured it's better for a guy in the back nine than a kid who's barely ready for the show.
Yep.
Given the state of their team, that was the decision. It's a short-term solution, and I think it's working out.
No, I think it's fine. And let's face it, it was fiscal more than anything else, that the decision with Connor Clifton. It wasn't about style of play, whatever. They weren't going to pay him the amount of money he was going to get from Buffalo. Right. And they wanted to bring somebody in on a 1-year, very short money deal. And that's what they got with Kevin Shattenkirk. And he does bring some things to the table that they definitely needed more of in depth in. But you can't have enough veteran defensemen as far as I'm concerned. And he's an asset in the right situation. And certainly when you have a bunch of capable defensemen, he's a good guy to have around. Like when you get into a pinch where you do need somebody to step up into a top 4 defenseman role for a very short term of time.
He can fake it for a while.
Of course he can. He can do it for a few games. And he did that earlier this year when all the defensemen went down and he played a couple of games over 20 minutes. He's been there before. He's done that for most of his career. So he's able to do it in short bursts. He's not obviously going to be able to do that over a long haul. But to your point, I think he brings poise with the puck. He brings a guy that is capable on the man advantage, and is going to just help keep things moving. Like if you get into a playoff battle with a team like Florida, where you need puck movers, he's probably going to help you, in a playoff setting. Given that he's also got tons of a playoff experience too, I think all that stuff is going to help. So I like what he brings, but he's a $1 million a year player on a bottom pairing role. Let's manage our expectations on what you think you're going to get out of Kevin Shattenkirk. I think he's done perfectly fine so far, given his job description and what you need out of him. These people, they are people, not machines. They will have good games and occasional bad games. 12-1-2. Best winning percentage in the NHL. Maybe Monty should be riding the referees for the awful officiating, and our best player won't be doing it for him and in the penalty box. And that's from Brian Hancock. So clearly he didn't approve of the bag skate, it sounds like. And Monty should be going after the officials, and he did. A couple games ago they got a bench minor because Monty was giving it to the refs. He didn't do it Greg Cronin style, where he ended up getting fined and it became he got thrown out of the game. I thought that was hilarious to watch, and knowing Crow, I thought it was really funny, just seeing his reactions on the bench that led to it. But Monty's I think savvy enough and poised enough that he knows as a coach what he can say and what he can't say, and he's trying to get his message across that he didn't like the calls there. But to his credit too, like a good coach, he was accountable for it afterwards, saying that they lost their composure on the bench a little bit when they got that and took responsibility for it.
He did a great job of staying away from that stuff and talking about where his team fell short. I thought he did it after Detroit. I thought he did it after Montreal. 2 games where I really found the officiating to be annoying. And I think right now there's a league-wide frustration. And I think that it might be misdirected to be completely at the officials. And I think the league has an issue here because every year starts with an emphasis penalty or a pet penalty.
Right.
The fallout of the pet penalty theory is that the rest of the rule book gets completely forgotten.
Yeah.
And you can
Yeah.
do anything else in a game
Right.
if the officials are not feeling embarrassed. The league seems to need to revise its theory on pet penalty versus rule book overall versus what we're going to do now, how consistent our games are. I just don't feel like there's a good synergy going on right now between the league and its refs. I think that I have all the respect for the refs, even though you'd never think so by listening to me on Twitter. But not this season. I've been kind of nuts. But I just think that they have a mandates and directives, and I also still think there needs to be an eye in the sky for the obvious ones that get missed, because in the course of all their checkoffs and necessary methods, it's possible for things to happen in a hockey game that somebody who's just following the puck and isn't responsible for anything is going to see, and they're not.
Of course. That happens at every level. There's so much happening on the ice. You can't possibly see everything that's going on.
How could you not see that?
There's no way.
It's very easy to not see one thing if you're responsible for everything.
That's right.
In fact, all the things that could happen and don't happen, because you had to be there to make sure that you saw it in case it did.
Yep.
And that's part of officiating.
Yeah, and I feel like one of the pet things this year is actually part of the reason McAvoy got whacked with the 4 games is I think the headshot thing has been one of the points of emphasis they've been looking at, and trying to make
that point of emphasis.
Trying to make a big statement on that. To continue to come down on those kind of hits where the head is getting targeted. And I think
coming right after the Elias Anderson one in Calgary, which was ridiculous. He flailed at that guy. You could see that he had him all lined up and was going for him at the blue line. And because he was going for an empty net when the game was over, and he sticks out a chicken wing and he makes sure he gets him. And that to me, for McAvoy to come only a week after that, or less than a week after that, and get the same suspension because he didn't go straight through. They ask an awful lot of guys when they're making missile hits. It's just outlaw the missile hit. If you want to tell, you almost.
Mick, don't go there. I don't want this, Mick. I don't want Mick. I do not want this to turn into the NFL where like every good hit is penalized. Please do not say that. We're not doing that.
It's getting to a point where you have to be lucky in order to have a clean hit.
Yeah, I can't watch football anymore because everything that used to be like a good play is a penalty now, and it is infuriating to watch. It's really difficult to watch, and I do not want hockey to get to that point. I want hockey to be safe for everybody. I obviously don't want anybody to have concussions, but I think there's a level of physicality in hockey that has to remain, or it's not hockey anymore. And I really would be concerned to continue to walk down that path. But I know what you mean. It's like, it's hard to make players walk this tightrope of playing fast, playing physical, but not going over the edge. But, I think every once in a while you will, and you get slapped on the wrist. But if you're like McAvoy, and you have a history of not doing that, I think you're going to be fine. You're going to go back to the player you were before, and be able to play that way, and, just go back to making clean shoulder checks into other players that are just big body contact hits that change momentum in games. I did think it was interesting, though, in McAvoy's first game back from the suspension, he had 0 hits in that game.
I thought, obvious watching the game. I didn't even look at the stat. I knew it. He played the puck the whole night. He just played position, and he went out of his way not to be involved in that regard. And that's unfortunate because he is a guy whose ability to hit is a tremendous asset. Almost like Scott Stevens, not quite in that league, but definitely reminiscent thereof.
No, but in this generation, he's that kind of version of that. Like he's the closest thing to a player that could play that way now is sort of the way he plays with, the physicality being a momentum shifter and being a big statement thing. And that's one of his biggest signature things, I think, on the ice is throwing big hits like that. So I think as time goes on and as it gets removed from the 4-game suspension, that will come back. But I definitely felt like his first game back, he was thinking about it. And you could see very visibly on the ice, he was thinking about it. All right, last question here. Haggs, the Bees do really well mentoring D-men. Carlo and McAvoy with Chara, Lowry getting shifts with both these guys, but they seem to not support their forwards as much. Matt Poitras has been pretty quiet away from support of stronger line mates. I get that forward is a different game, but how do the Bees better support young forwards? I'm thinking of, and here we go in the Wayback Machine, Mick. I'm thinking of Spooner, Coco, and countless others that were skilled forwards and bad fits for bottom six work and never got traction. And that's from Joseph Stucker, who was also on the Substack chat last night. I answered this last night. Like, when you mention guys like Spooner and Coco, it really doesn't register with me because they're like playing in the KHL right now. And granted, they're both doing really well in the KHL, but they didn't stick in the NHL. And Anders Bjork didn't really stick around and do much impact wise. And there's a list of players that were prospects for the Bruins that, never really panned out. And it was less about the way they were treated or who they were skating with at the NHL level. And it was more that they just weren't NHL players. There's a litany of these guys. Really, the only guy I look at now that kind of went through the Bruins and went on and stuck around, that I think, was a player that they could have held on to was Frank Vetrano. Like, he's been a pretty good player where he's been.
He shot his way out of town, though.
He did, but he's still been continued to be a goal scorer, a guy that
would love to have the player that he's become.
Yes.
But I think it took the move. It took multiple rejections from other teams in order for him to become the player he did, similar to Riley Smith.
Yep.
Riley Smith, wound up carrying the Stanley Cup last year because he realized you got to go through the gates of hell to get it.
Yeah.
And he became a hard player. And it took him a long time to get there. Vetrano has actually done it more quickly than Riley Smith did. And but Vetrano had the attitude and the mouth long before he had the game. But he's got himself fitter. He got himself faster. And he plays with an edge, and that's not what the Bruins had when they had him. They just had a kid who thought he was all that in a bag of chips when he was here, and he wasn't. Now, when you say Coco and Spooner, those are centermen, skilled centermen. Comparing Poitras to those guys, no. Poitras goes in the corners and competes.
Right.
Poitras wins pucks. Poitras holds on to pucks. Poitras makes plays. Poitras takes the physical contact. Spooner tried to skirt it with his 10-2 skates, and Coco generally was also a guy who tried to slither through the game or around the game, is a better way to put it. And I didn't feel like either one of those guys, could play on their own. Poitras has shown a lot of signs that he can develop into a self-standing player and help other players be better. This is not about that. Although those concerns may come to the fore, but they certainly don't relate. And I would never compare Poitras to those two guys.
No, I wouldn't either. And like Spooner was a perimeter player. That was the biggest knock on him, is just he would stay to the outside. He wasn't going to get involved anywhere around the net. Coco was a tweener. Coco was not big enough, strong enough, or fast enough to play at the NHL level. Like, he was one of those guys that was very effective at the AHL level, but then when you put him up in the NHL, he could not do it. He didn't have any of the qualities that you needed in any of those categories that were up to NHL caliber. And he was another one that I think thought he was, similar to Vetrano, thought he deserved all these chances and all these things happening for him, but when he never really earned it at the NHL level. But as far as Poitras is concerned, I have no problem with him being in sort of a pseudo third line center role right now with guys like DeBrusk and Heinen or Morgan Geekie when he comes back, because they have chemistry. And I think, Patrice Bergeron was a third line player when he first came up with the Bruins. I think that's a fine place to put a 19-year-old that's trying to make his way in the NHL. And to your point, I think he shows a lot of qualities that are going to keep him in the NHL for a long time. Speaking of Poitras, much more so than any of these other sort of also-rans or other players that came through as prospects, but never really stuck in the National Hockey League for a multitude of reasons. So, Patra, I'm perfectly fine with the way they've developed him and how they're using him. I don't have any issues at all with that.
The other guy you were just remind me of when you brought up Coco was back from 20 years ago when Bergeron was a rookie, was Sergei Zinoviev.
Yeah.
The Russian center who went to Providence and complained that the KHL was better than the AHL. And what is he doing there? And he wound up becoming a very successful KHL player.
Yep.
But and he had a good career over there. Not a spectacular one, but a very good one.
Yeah.
But he wasn't ready for this, and he didn't understand. That's where I got to give Pasta credit, because Pasta, wasn't acclimated at all to the North American game when he came over, and yet he toughed it out, and it took him a while to get it, and now look at him. So, God bless him.
Yep, and I'll give Spooner and Coco their flowers. They are leading scorers on their KHL teams right now and have been for a few years on whatever teams they're playing for. So they're finding success in the KHL. They just were not NHL players. They were good people and good hockey players, just not good enough to play in the best hockey league in the world and make an impact. All right, Mick, thank you very much for joining this mailbag episode of the Pucks with Haggs podcast. Let's thank our sponsors one more time. Factor Meals, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit. Helps you if you're on the go and you're super busy. Meals ready in 2 minutes. Healthy, delicious meals. They're environmentally conscious too. They offset 100% of their delivery emissions with renewable electricity for production sites and offices, and sustainably sourced seafood in their meals. So they do the good things for the environment, as well as having delicious food. Head to factormeals.com/Haggs50 and use code Haggs50 to get 50% off your first box. And of course, FanDuel Sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Bet on spreads, player props, over-unders, so much more. That's $150 if your team wins. So if you've been thinking about jumping on FanDuel and getting some bets now that the NFL and the NHL are going, and the NBA, go watch Victor Wembanyama, all 7'6" of him with the San Antonio Spurs. Bet some player props on him. Go for it. Visit fanduel.com/Boston and kick off all of the winter sports seasons that are in full effect right now. Mick, thank you very much for joining me. Everybody, thank you very much for listening.